Welcome. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how to define a class in Java. So let's get started. A couple of units ago, we learned how to make objects from a class. And so we got a little bit of exposure to classes and how they work, but in this unit, we're going to go take a deep dive and learn how to make them ourselves. So the depth of what we do is going to be a whole lot more, even though a lot of the things that we see, particularly in this lesson, will be familiar to you. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to create a class and use objects from that class, create and use instance variables, create and use class methods, and you will be able to create a special method called toString and explain how it works. As a review, let's just remind ourselves of what an object is made of, and it's really two things. The first is what the object has, which are its attributes. And attributes are simply information that an object holds, and we define these with instance variables. For example, a book object might have an attribute for the title and author, and those would be strings, right? String title and string author. A string object has an attribute that stores the characters. So attributes are what an object has, what information it knows. Conversely, objects also have behaviors, which are things the objects do, which are defined by methods. For example, a book object might have a method that computes and returns the MLA citation for the book as a string. Or a string object, which we've worked with before, might have a method, well, it does have a method that takes a substring of the string. So we have attributes, things the object knows, and we have behaviors, things the object can do. Before we dive into the specifics of how to write classes, it's really important that you understand the big picture of why we're using objects and classes. The truth is that modern software, the apps and games that you use, are made up almost entirely of objects, and of course those objects are defined by classes. And the overarching purpose of what's called object-oriented programming is to solve problems by breaking systems that are really, really complicated into individual components. For example, maybe a coffee shop, they would have objects to represent the drinks they sell and the orders that customers place and the inventory that they stock. A social media platform certainly would have objects to represent the users, objects to represent the posts that the users make, and objects to represent the comments on those posts. And video games might have objects to represent the characters, enemies, power-ups, weapons, the list goes on. See, all of these systems are complicated, but we can make them simpler if we identify the individual components that make up the systems and represent them using an object. So for the remainder of this lesson, we're going to take and run with the idea of a social media platform, and specifically the post of a social media platform. And there are many that I could have picked, but I chose a tweet from Twitter. So if you don't know, Twitter is a social media platform that is composed of many objects, but a tweet object is the core of the system. And the idea is that somebody can tweet something out, and then all their followers can see what they had to say. So tweet objects, like all objects, will be defined by a class, and our goal for the remainder of this lesson is to implement our own version of this class. We remember from previous lessons that objects are built from classes, and in order to create a class, there's a few things we need to do. One is that we need to add a new Java file to our project. It's important to remember that the file must share its name with the class. So if my class is called tweet, I will make the file called tweet.java. And also, by convention, class names should start with a capital letter. Legally, they don't have to. Your code will work if you start them with a lowercase, but everybody on the planet who codes Java starts their class names with a capital letter, so we will do the same thing. Once we've created our class, there are two things we have to define. First is the attributes, then later we'll have to define the behaviors using methods. The attributes, remember, are what a tweet will have, what information it will know, and we define these using instance variables. And so there's probably a lot of things that the tweet could have, but we're going to stick to three for simplicity. Number one is we need to know what the tweet says. So that will be the text of the tweet, and it will be a string. Number two, we'd like to know who wrote the tweet, so that will be the author, which will also be a string. And finally, the thing that makes it social media is people's ability to interact with the content, so we will also keep track of how many likes the tweet has as an int. Now at this point, we haven't made any methods in our tweet class, but nonetheless, we can start making tweet objects if we want to. So I can say tweet t equals new tweet, and I can set the text of that object and the author and the likes, and I can even display all the information of that object in a print line statement, which gives the following output. Now that said, I probably want to define some methods for a couple of reasons. Number one, right here, you notice that I just set the likes to 100, and that doesn't necessarily mean 100 people liked my tweet. And so I feel like maybe that shouldn't be allowed to happen. Maybe we want a method to control that for us. I also feel like this code is getting a little complicated, and maybe by moving some of it into the class, we could clean this up and allow the tweet object to, I guess, more or less take care of itself. Step one of writing our class was defining the attributes, or the instance variables. And now step two is going to be to define the behaviors. And so right now we're going to focus on two, but we'll add more in the future. One is the ability to like the tweet, and the other is the ability to get the tweet as a string. So let's see how those work. On this screen, I've implemented the like method. Notice that the behaviors of the class, the methods, go below the instance variables. So our instance variables are still up here at the top, and our like method is now down here below. We'll talk about what public means later, so we won't worry about that. But notice that the method is void. I don't intend for this one to return a value, and also notice that it takes no parameters. So we have empty parentheses. And what the method does very simply is it adds 1 to the number of likes, and it displays a confirmation message that you like this. The one thing I want you to notice before we move on is how the likes plus plus, how the method actually is affecting the instance data of the object. So when we like this tweet, its likes variable will increase by 1. And it's very common for an object's methods to alter the instance data of the object. On this slide, we see that we've modified our code slightly. Previously, we had set the likes to 100, but now we are calling the method t.like. So we're using the method to like the tweet instead of trying to set it directly, which updates the output. Notice that it does say at the top of our output that you liked this because the method print lines that. And also, we can see that it increased the likes instance variable by 1. The next method that we'll implement is the toString method. Now, on this slide, I did not include the like method that we just did. It's still there, I just didn't put it so that everything would fit. So the job of a toString method is to return a string version of the object, and it's up to us to define what that means. But the method header is always going to be the same. It's always going to be public, it's always going to return a string, and it is going to be called toString with a lowercase t and a capital S. It also takes no parameters. Now your method must be called this exactly because Java knows what a toString method is, and it's important, if this is going to all work correctly, that we give Java what it's expecting. And of course, in the method body, there isn't a lot going on here other than I'm returning the instance data all concatenated together with some new lines and some words. And then back to our code where we use the tweet object t. Notice that the very last line has been modified. What used to be a pretty complex print line statement has just been replaced with print line t. So what happens when you print line an object, Java will automatically call the toString method if you've defined one. And so remember, the toString method returns a string, and so what we're doing is we are print lining the string that it returns, which we can see we have the same output that we did before, but we've just done it in a much simpler way, at least from the perspective of this code. Before we wrap up, let's check your understanding. So let's suppose I want to add another method to the tweet class that allows individuals to reply or comment on a tweet. So what it will do is it will basically add onto the text of the tweet. So originally my tweet text is avocados are squishy, but I want to add to it 2 comments. Only if they're ripe by Mr. Yoder and you're ripe by Mr. Fox. And what will happen, again, this will add on to the text of the tweet so that when we print line the tweet, not only will we get the tweet, but we will also get these comments down below. And so I'd like you to pause the video and think about 2 things. Number 1, what would the header of the add reply method be? What would the header be? And then number 2, you don't have to write the body of the method, but at least describe what the body of the method would do. Pause the video and continue when you're ready. On the right, you can see my solution to the add reply method. Yours should be called add reply, and it should have 2 string parameters, one for the reply itself and the other for the name of the person who made the reply. The body of your method probably would look different than mine because it's kind of up to us how we format it. But the key thing is that we should be adding on to the text of the tweet. And by text, I mean this instance variable right at the top. And the goal here, remember, is to add those replies to the text. There is much, much more to learn about writing classes, but at this point we should have a basic understanding. We should be able to create a class and use objects created from the class. We should be able to create and use instance variables. We can create and use class methods, and we can create a toString method and explain how it works.